We're talking about being able to price the day that a war begins. We're talking about markets that are technically resolvable via assassination. That it's a whole new paradigm.
Welcome back to another edition of the Business of Betting podcast. I am your host, Jeff Edelstein, senior analyst within Game. I'm joined today by someone who's making history today, folks. He is the two-time guest on the Business of Betting podcast under me, the third host. So there's a lot of moving parts there. But Dan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be back. Appreciate y'all having me on.
Yeah, so the reason I have you back on is because I'm going to do a little bit of a Sebastian Maniscalco impression here, if you'll allow it. What the hell are you doing? You got this new business that you dialed up. You went from Verse to Betting Intelligence. You're the chief intelligence officer and co-founder of this company, Betting Intelligence. Betting Intelligence is already getting traction. New York Times op-eds. I read through your Twitter post of a week or so ago. Explain to me, like I'm a moron, exactly what it is you're up to these days. Because I got to be honest with you. I'm having a little bit of a tough time. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, not afraid to admit it. But there's obviously something cooking here, and I need to know more about it. So fill me in.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, look, the prediction market space has grown tremendously over the last 2 years, really 1 year, for seeing folks get into the business that weren't in it before, right? So my previous role at Verse, that was something we were focused on from the beginning, right? In 2020, I launched Verse with the intent of a bet on anything app. So I've seen it grow through different loopholes and now into federal regulation. You know, what kept coming up in my time in this industry was something that was uniquely personal to me, which was these markets do more than entertain. They actually claim to price reality. And, you know, when my family was living in Israel for the last 2 years, I was actually checking the poly markets to determine how worried I should be about their physical safety. When I realized that the intelligence value of these markets went beyond just myself, but also governments, corporations, risk teams, insurance companies, media, that's when I started to see an opportunity here with what we're building at Betting Intelligence. So Betting Intelligence is a private intelligence firm dedicated to a new discipline of what we call BETINT. So if you've heard of OSINT, open source intelligence, HUMINT, human intelligence, this is a new discipline that we're bringing into the light, dedicated to interpreting market behavior, yes, on prediction markets, but also on various gambling activities or, you know, stock trading activities as well. This is a firm dedicated to providing the data that folks need to stay ahead of the news. Because if there's one thing an insider does first, it's not tweet, it's bet. There are a lot of folks out there, from newsrooms to government agencies, who would like to be the first to see that happen.
So are the Mets going to win tonight, or that's not what we're doing here? I'm joking. I know that's not what you're doing. It is interesting right off the jump, though, that, you know, while all the oxygen in the room right now when it comes to prediction markets is about the sports betting markets, you're saying, I'm done. This is whether or not sports are, you know, whether or not they're allowed to have sports in the future, doesn't matter. You're concentrating on obviously much more important, well, I'll put it in quotes, much more important material.
Certainly. I mean, I think, you know, sports have brought prediction markets into the limelight. We all know what's going on with the legal battles they're facing to federalize, you know, your LeBron James parlay as a event contract. And everyone has opinions on that. I'm very pro prediction market. I think the nuance of sports, I'll leave to the high paid lawyers and folks that are fighting that fight. But to me, the long-term consequence of putting a price on everything, sports was already plenty covered by sharps and analysts across the world. We're talking about being able to price the day that a war begins. We're talking about markets that are technically resolvable via assassination. That it's a whole new paradigm that these markets are getting into. And we're not just talking about Kalshi, right? Kalshi's regulated. They've done a very good job establishing themselves as the regulated space. But we're not just talking about Polymarket either, right? If we are to live in a world where there's a price on everything, Polymarket and Kalshi are not the only companies pursuing that option and pursuing that market. And you got to expect, with as many buttoned up venture-backed companies there will be bad actors trading on those markets, and in some cases creating those markets. So we're really built for the future, because we think things are going to get a whole lot worse. And, you know, you see the Navy SEAL or the special operator arrested, you know, for trading on his own operation. You know, that's like Colonel Terry Rozier right there. Like this is a whole new risk scenario for what about the helicopter pilots? What about the White House staffers who overhear things? I mean, everything is a leak environment now.
I was going to ask you later, but I guess I'll bring it up now. Kalshi certainly, Polymarket even now to an extent, are building in. And again, I'm going to use a lot of air quotes in this conversation today. And here's another one: safeguards. We'll put that in air quotes around insider trading. Which is interesting because to me, it's interesting on two levels. Level number one, the entire concept of prediction markets has always been pitched to me as truth machines, right? And insider information is basically like it's a feature, not a bug. So trying to ban it seems like counterintuitive. And then secondly, as you just pointed out, sure, you can ban, you can put in insider trading guardrails. And if I'm, a colonel in the army and I know I'm going to be invading a country tomorrow, I can't bet on it. How are you going to prove that I didn't tell my buddy Tommy to put a bet down on it? Right?
Not only how are you going to prove it, it's literally legal by the current state of affairs. That sourcing and attribution of that public material information. Yeah, there's been some interesting quotes from even Kalshi CEO Tariq Mansour. He says that, if a camera operator doing a dry rehearsal at the Super Bowl sees what song gets played first by Bad Bunny, is that insider trading? And his opinion, and I don't want to misquote him, but his opinion was it was not a no, right? Or it was not a yes, I should say. So I think these edge case scenarios, that's where I think this type of insider trading will occur on KYC platforms. But I think a real insider knows that if you're signing up with their social security information, this is not the place for you to commit crimes. And so I think most people who have real inside information are going to be attracted to the methods that they believe can conceal that. Now, if they can fully conceal that or not is sort of what we do.
Now, you said earlier you think things are going to get worse. And by worse, I take it to mean more sites, more actors, more people putting money where their mouth is, more people betting on things when maybe they shouldn't be betting on things.
Well, look, I'll say this. There was a market on if Charlie Kirk ran for office. Okay. Now, do we have any evidence to suggest that anything occurred with that tragedy that was related to predict? Absolutely not. That being said, you have to consider a scenario where someone sees that market and thinks, okay, I could get a lot of money down. And whether it's for myself or my family or my organization, could I potentially take drastic action that results in a financial benefit, right? Look, I'm no expert on assassinations, but you used to have to meet up with the mob and get your paper bag of money to pay you for your crimes. Now it's a smart contract on the blockchain. These types of things create risk scenarios that we haven't really thought about before. And I hope we never see something like that occur. But I do think the organizations who monitor security of whatever it is that is relevant to themselves need to be thinking about how these markets can be manipulated or weaponized. And I'm not trying to say every market is bad and every market is going to result in a tragedy. That's really not what we're here for. We're kind of looking more to provide kind of an information insurance layer that you're not going to find out last or too late if suspicious activity happens on a market that relates to you or your organization or your country.
I have a question about that, but I want to roll back for a second. Listen, when I go to Wegmans and I'm buying 6 bagels and I'm going to the self-checkout, I'm only buying 5. I'll cheat a bagel just because I can get away with it. I am not above putting my thumb on the scale if it's going to help me, right? I think most people aren't above it if they're going to put their thumb on the scale. And what you were saying before, yes, that's fucking crazy. The idea that someone would murder somebody to win a bet. Right? But I don't know. If somebody told me that I could make $100 million by pulling a trigger, am I going to, do I say automatically no? I don't know that I do. And I'm not saying I'm a murderer. I'm not saying I'm a horrible person. But when you're talking about like setting my family up for the rest of their lives, that potential like is always going to exist. And then you can just play around with it, any number of ways. I mean, if prediction markets continue going, like what's to stop me from hiding a cancer diagnosis and making a market for myself? Will Jeff Edelstein die this year?
The only thing stopping you is if anyone wants to bet on that. The liquidity is the only thing that matters here, because there could be a market of, will this person be out of office or so on? But if there's only $50,000, $100,000 in the market, but look, $100,000 in America is not as valuable as a general or even a lower level participant in a foreign military who has a different currency with a different sort of exchange rate, where $100,000, I mean, yeah, 100,000 is a lot of money to anybody, but to some people, it is everything. It is the big payout of their lives. So I think that's a consideration. And I'll give a less violent example that we track as well. So yes, the doom and gloom of people being hurt or killed in markets is an obvious one to talk about. But let's talk about one where folks are utilizing tools at their disposal that allows them to manipulate public sentiment. For example, there are certain Twitter accounts that have large followings in the geopolitics world, right? And people trust that. One day, one of these account owners might say, you know what, there's a poly market on if U.S. forces enter Iran by X date, right? This is kind of a real example, but a fake hypothetical. I am going to say, if I'm the owner of that account, I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to go tweet with high confidence that there were reports of U.S. soldiers on the ground in Iran. There's footage. All right, maybe I'm going to use AI to mock up that footage. Maybe I'm going to pay a bot farm to promote that rumor. So I've now put a lot of money in at maybe 10% probability that this occurs. And people are reacting to my media and my tweet and my dissemination, and that market pumps to 50%. And then I sell, and I've just 5x'd my money without ever having to pick up a weapon or get off my couch. And so that's another angle that we look at is, psychological operations, whether it's from a state actor or an individual. These are going to become higher and higher risk. We've seen like several poly markets that involve celebrities like the streamer Clavicular, or there's some British guy like Lord Miles had markets on them, and they caught insider trading because the guy's manager knew the answer to the question they were trading. So there can be very innocent examples of let's make everyone believe something and let's profit from that disinformation. And at a large scale, that can be pollutive to the information environment, which is already toxic and broken across whether it's social media or mainstream media. Like nobody trusts anybody these days. And this is only going to create more distrust.
This business then, are you starting it because of your love of prediction markets and you want to be part of the stream, or because you're starting to say, holy shit, this is real danger and no one's keeping an eye on this shit?
Yeah, so I have two co-founders in this business, Sean Guillory and Gary Moreland. And Sean in particular comes from the world of the intelligence community, from prototyping technology in the sort of non-kinetic warfare space. And he's been on this beat for 3 years. So long before anyone was talking about prediction markets, there are actually examples of prediction markets used for academic or even government purposes in the past, the Iowa electronic market being a key example, as well as a DARPA-funded project in the early 2000s that literally listed, will there be a terrorist attack? Will this person be assassinated? It was shut down rather quickly due to political backlash, but prediction markets have been around for a long time. So Sean had this vision of the risk profile that comes with this, and he and I connected and really just had a lot to talk about on this topic. And my father has spent 30 years in the defense and intelligence community. So I kind of come from this world from an upbringing side, but never from a professional side. But once I started talking to his network about this and Sean's network, we started bringing these folks together, I can guarantee you that there's a lot of interest in not being left behind or not being last to know. Some of these people we're talking to, their entire business is knowing before everyone else. So, and look, BETINT is not a perfect intelligence discipline. It needs to be blended in your analysis with all the other tools and techniques used. So it's not a silver bullet, but it is absolutely something that sophisticated organizations, they don't know that they need to track it in some cases, but the ones that do have reached, we're talking to already.
I'm not going to ask you who, but what types of industries are you talking to?
Yeah, so media is a big example. Just today, we published an investigation with USA Today on some suspicious activity in U.S.-Cuba conflict markets. So journalism is a huge use case for this. I'll talk about the product a bit because that helps explain. Basically, the product is a intelligence terminal for your analyst to monitor as many markets in the depth that you need to actually stay ahead. So what that means is turning on alerts for market movements, whale trades, maybe specific traders that you're tracking. We can track those wallets down to where they funded their wallets with, where they sent that money after, potentially seeing where they tried to cash out. we go, several layers deep. We also apply an AI interface on top of that. So you can use a natural language question to say, hey, what's going on in the Cuba US markets? Or, hey, is there any indication Trump is going to be removed from office this year? And it'll pull that data from the markets and kind of create that investigative path for you to start to use prediction markets for the value that they provide, adjusted for volume, adjusted for timeliness. There's a lot of layers to this data. So off the bat, the alerting systems is something that we have a ton of journalists interested in. We're also talking to a lot of, government stakeholders, folks at different agencies who are looking to sophisticate their attempts to kind of harness this data, as well as, some financial institutions who are looking to balance the risk that comes from these markets existing. I think there was a well-covered example of companies that were specifically audited by KPMG were having suspicious activities traded on their earnings reports markets. So it was like, will company X beat earnings reports this quarter? And there was one trader who was making a lot of money, and the one common thread was that they were all audited by KPMG. So though that's an example, we're not working with them, but that's an example that was in the public eye about, how even financial institutions need to have this type of information insurance to track their own security, their information and intellectual.
The stuff that like you're looking at, I mean, is there other stuff that is covering the same ground, but not via watching prediction markets?
I think the explosion of interest in congressional stock trading is a really good place to look at here, because everyone has now become desensitized to hearing about a Congress member trading on defense stocks right before we go to war, or trading on pharmaceutical stocks right before we, accelerate an FDA process. It's unfortunately become commonplace. And that type of, financial intelligence is absolutely something that we're looking to incorporate into our assessments. But there's a 90-day disclosure window on congressional stock trading. So even if you're on that beat, like folks like Unusual Whales and many other companies have done a great job of doing that, you're still at a bit of a disadvantage because of the lag time. So I would say that's an example of where we think betting intelligence kind of overlaps with information that folks are already talking about. And I also would just point out that a lot of books overseas, whether they're regulated or not, have started to list markets that are not directly sports. So, you see a lot of politics markets in the UK. That's relatively common. Sites like Bovada have started to introduce betting markets on things that are not sports. So we expect that to only grow, and the opportunity, whether you're regulated or not, to start taking and booking bets on real life events. That's the type of data that the BETINT terminal is going to provide to you. So it's not just Kalshi, it's not just Polymark. It's going to be, where are people betting on this, and how can I evaluate that data collectively?
Do you think the prediction market people are pro, anti, or agnostic when it comes to what you're trying to pull off here?
I would like to think they're pro, because in their minds, they want to see their businesses grow and not have some terrible tragedy get tied to them, which so far I wouldn't consider, the arrest of a special operator to be a tragedy. I think the tragedy would have been if he bet on it, not to happen, and then intentionally, made sure the mission didn't go to success, right? So that's more fantastical, and I don't really think that is necessarily in line with what would happen. But I do think we may be, at least in BETINT's mind, we would like to avoid ever seeing a type of event that makes us really important, because that would indicate something, tragic has occurred. But I think the markets are aligned with that goal, right? Stay as best as they can, stay on the good side of news. And I think that the research we're doing, which, we'll have more announcements later, but, we're collaborating with academics, researchers, pollsters, folks who come at this from a data analytics angle, not a are we making money on fees angle. Honestly, whether they like it or not doesn't much affect us to what we're doing.
In the world of sports betting, and this has been going on forever, sharp bettors who are known as sharps will occasionally pop in to the books on late Sunday night to put money down on the Bears at -6.5, with the sole purpose of watching the books move the line so that they could come in on the Giants on the other side. Do you see that happening in prediction markets, similar things? And would that be something that you guys could pick up on?
Totally. So there's kind of two angles to that we see. One is the poly pump fake that I referenced earlier, where you're kind of intentionally moving a line whether that's to profit off that movement or to re-enter the market at a better position for yourself. That's definitely something we monitor and have written about on our Substack, BETINT.net. The other angle, which is a really interesting one, is the concept of signal jamming. There was like a $1.8 million bet placed on Polymarket that the U.S. would not strike Iran on February 28th. That happened to be when we struck them. And so you got to ask yourself, was that intentionally placed to basically soak up any leakage about that operation? Because we talked earlier about the helicopter pilots or the chefs who know about what's going on. Maybe they only have 5 to 10K in disposable income to put on their inside information. So if $1 million comes in on the other side, your 10K leak is not going to move that market. So you put up a volume wall on no, and it basically absorbs the yes leaks that come through. And so we call that signal jamming. We think there's a lot of use cases for that. Some of those operational security focused, like what we, suspect follows the trail of, but also for sort of what you're talking about is you go put a lot on something not to happen and get that market pumped to no. And then you are doing that because you know that in the end, it will resolve to yes, and you'll be able to make up whatever you had to sacrifice to move that line. So look, this is the Wild West of financial markets now, and the volume and the liquidity is the only limiting factor to the motivations for some of these bad actor movements. Some of these markets, there's just not enough liquidity to take the risk.
But you say bad actor, but in some cases it could be good actor. Like if I'm going to invade Nazi Germany, I want to signal jam that. I want them to think I'm not coming today, right?
That's exactly why we focus on what we do, because there are folks who want to use this or counteract this.
It feels like the cat and mouse game on the geopolitical scale is endless when it comes to like how you can manipulate prediction markets to be what you want them to be. You had said earlier that great use cases is within journalism. Every major media operator signing deals with Polymarket or Kalshi. How comfortable are you with them using? I mean, I think they're using it wrong in many cases. Saying, oh, there's a 43% chance of such and such a thing happening. There's a 43% chance that people in the betting markets think it's going to happen, which is often going to be much different than what real life necessarily is. I just wrote about a fascinating study out of Stanford and Cornell that on single name markets, not things like tied to like S&P 500 or things like that, but, will the U.S. invade Iran? Will Jeff Bezos go to the Super Bowl? Things like that. Overwhelming people bet with yes. Overwhelming, the answer always comes back being no. Like it was like 61% of bets are on yes, and only 32% come out as yes.
It's human psychology. How many prize picks lineups are all unders? How many bets do people make that are betting, oh, I hope this game nobody scores? That's not exactly human psychology, but it's also, counterproductive to an analytical approach. And that's why a lot of sharp traders on these markets take pride in their ability to basically not fall into the trap of getting excited by the possibility of it happening. And look, I think that when DraftKings or when on ESPN pregame, we're talking about, the Cavs Pistons game, I think a lot of people say, oh, okay, the line's 6.5. That's cool. I don't know if that's going to happen like that, but that's nice. That's what the current estimate is, right? I think a lot of people treat that as, either a opportunity if you disagree, right? Okay, I'm going to go bet on that because I disagree with that line, or, validation of what consensus is. But nobody thinks that, oh yeah, that means the Pistons are absolutely going to win by 6 points, right? I think it's a little bit of when you're dealing with politics, when you're dealing with things things that affect people's lives more than how many points Terry Rozier scores. That's where you start to see the human nature leak into the betting activity. But there are people who bet a lot of money on sports, so I don't want to sound like an amateur here. There are totally people who bet $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 on casual bets. But if you look at Polymarket's most active traders, they're betting 5, 6, 10, 15K on will Trump announce the Strait of Hormuz returns to normal? Will, this tariff be approved by the Supreme Court or not? These are people moving real money on real predictions. Whether it's gambling or skillful forecasting, I'm not going to be the determiner of that. But I do think that the sports betting world has provided us a framework to evaluate this, but I'm not sure it's going to fully line up with what happens when you really have markets on everything. I think it requires a bit of a different mental model.
I agree with you, but I think that the vast majority of us are not going to be able to handle that. And which is why, like, when, CNN says, according to Polymar, according to Kalshi, there's a 43% chance that the Strait of Hormuz will be open, I feel like we're using this in the wrong way. Do you sense that, or am I the one that's wrong here?
No, I think it's not the most accurate way to portray it, but I don't think it's wrong either, right? And these markets, even if someone who works at one of these platforms is listening and thinks, damn, this guy's a narc, I'm a supporter of these markets, and I actually support the concept that they are very accurate. Now, I wouldn't say that they truly are truth machines or that they truly price reality, but I would also say that the ability to place real money on your prediction creates an incentive to be right that didn't exist before. And I think there is real analytical value to determine. And look, Polymarket has called major elections almost perfectly for the last 3 years. There's a reason for that. And it's not because they're all manipulated and rigged and that Zoran is betting on his own. It's not for reasons that are attributable to bad actors. It's because these markets have real price discovery components. So I think it's fair that the news outlets are using the headline sticker price. And honestly, I think if you want to kind of correct them, it just would be weighting that price based off volume. And then you get really boring really quick. So I don't think Steve Kornacki wants to talk about a weighted volume average on these markets because he's on TV and it's, he's looking for a soundbite that is, and I don't think he's wrong either. I just think it's a matter of, maybe the nerdy side of this is never going to necessarily appeal to the mainstream, except for decision desk type stuff, right? Come elections, people will be in the granular data of these markets. And we're talking to folks who are prioritizing that over everything.
You've said bad actors a lot. I'm starting to think, though, that we should just drop the bad and just call them actors. Because, because seriously, like if I knew, if there was a market, will Jeff Edelstein say chicken during his interview with Dan Zimmermann, and I just now say chicken, does that make me a bad actor, or am I just an actor? I'm just, I know I'm like kind of like splitting hairs here, but like there's a big difference between saying I'm going to assassinate somebody for money and I'm going to say chicken on this earnings call to cash in. But they're obviously very different, but they're algorithmically the same, kind of, right? It's like manipulating a market is manipulating a market, period. It's not even manipulating, it's just having the knowledge of what it is. And right, it comes down to enforcement.
I don't know if when the Coinbase CEO, Brian Armstrong, read off at the end of their earnings call, he read off all the words that they hadn't said yet on Polymarket, or maybe it was Kalshi on the mention market for them. People criticize that because it is kind of making a mockery of the concept of what these markets serve to do. Now, in his mind, maybe he thinks it's all fun and games, trolling the no-betters. But he runs his own prediction market site. He is the CEO of a company that operates a prediction market platform that works closely with the SEC and CFTC on a variety of topics. So look, it comes down to enforcement. Now, I don't think Brian Armstrong's getting arrested for manipulating markets anytime soon, but I think 10 years ago, no one would be comfortable with that type of joke or that type of troll. Look, I think we're dealing with an administration that is extremely friendly and in some cases has vested interests in the success of this industry. And I think that has to be taken into account when we talk about enforcement. And I think that you're seeing, how many times can you read operators saying, we greatly appreciate Michael Selig's comments on we're never in that, everyone's in lockstep for the first time in gambling regulation history for a particular reason, I would say. So I think it comes down to enforcement. I agree. There will be actors that take action. It will be subjective on if those are bad actors or just actors. I agree.
You didn't get into this business thinking that it's going to end anytime soon. So I guess in your mind, it's just going to continue growing. Where do you see this business? It's, the betting intelligence, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. I mean, this is something that it's got to be on the desk of anyone who's in a position of making money or making decisions? Is that the idea?
Yeah, the idea is that nobody has the time to monitor everything, right? And nobody has the ability to track every single market movement from their desks. So they're going to need to use a combination of AI automations and third-party software to do that. So for us, we see, we start with media, government, research-focused folks. We're not even really talking about the folks who are trading, right? So I think over time, I see what we're doing as like launching stock market intelligence in 2000, right? Like it's going to be a no-brainer in 5 years that people are spending a lot of time and money making sure that they have the best data and analysis tools for what is happening in financial markets, because that's already the world we live in. And I just subscribe to the concept that prediction markets will join the stock market as, a daily part of our lives. And I think that the Polymarket partnership with ICE represents that, right? The level of institutional investment that these platforms are raising, it's not just because they have a great product. It's because that they know if they can get this to SCOTUS and approve the frameworks that they're operating in currently, that's 100 years of prosperity for these companies. And so I subscribe to the concept that they'll be successful in doing that. And even if they aren't, they'll move offshore and it'll exist in a different format, or it'll be reconsidered over the next 10 years. So I'm very bullish on the fact that these companies are here to stay. They define kind of a new form of financial markets for society, for better or worse, to participate in. My biggest fear, truthfully, is the volume on these platforms is exciting enough to retail because you can still get in there and you can still make meaningful price action from your activity. When JP Morgan is hedging an AOC presidency by betting so much on Rubio or Vance, that is something that they're used to putting hundreds of millions of dollars and into initiatives and into investments. My biggest fear is that the institutions are going to come into these markets and basically make it no fun for retail. That's actually my biggest concern, because right now there's no benefit to a big financial institution putting $15 million on a presidential candidate because it's just going to swing the market so much. Maybe that's a bad example because presidential elections have so much volume, but we're talking more granular items like the Strait of Hormuz returning to open traffic. There are a lot of shipping companies and logistics companies that have a lot of money riding on that type of outcome. My concern is that they're going to come in and they're going to set all the prices and they're going to effectively price out any real retail trade. And after that, I'm not sure how interesting these markets become to the average person if it's not a wisdom of the crowd play and it's more of a wisdom of the powerful play.
That's something I hadn't heard before, but now you bring it up. If I'm running my own little oil company, I should be betting against the Strait of Hormuz opening right now on Polymarket to make sure my cash comes any way that I want. And you're saying that stuff like this isn't happening at scale yet because the volume is just not there.
Yeah, and I'm sure sophisticated folks are spending a lot of time understanding how to use the markets, for their benefit, and as they should. But yeah, I think that's something that Kalshi talks a lot about: block trades and coordinating with institutions. And I think that is a double-edged sword because yes, it brings credibility, it brings liquidity, but if everything ends up trapping retail into what we want them to do and then snapping their neck off, that's not going to be the experience that we have today that people love about these markets right now.
Jeez. I kind of anticipate waking up in a cold sweat at 3 o'clock tonight after this conversation. Dan, pleasure having you on again, man. You're closing in. This is your second time with me. I think I'm not sure. I got to check with the producers here, but I'm pretty sure that if you get the 5 time, we do like this Saturday Night Live. You get the smoking jacket, business of betting, embroidered, and all that. So fingers crossed. A couple more times we'll have you on, man. Dan Zimmermann, Betting Intelligence. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Jim. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and appreciate the time.